I flatlined for 12 seconds while my family rode Space Mountain. That sentence sounds like it came from a bad movie script, but it's the truth. My name is Helen Grace, and I died in the ICU while my daughter was queuing up for a churro. I don't remember collapsing. I don't remember the ambulance. I only remember waking up to the smell of disinfectant and the sound of a heart monitor screaming into a flatline. There was this weight on my chest, like I had been underwater for too long. And when I opened my eyes, the nurse jumped like I'd scared him. He was kind, I'll give him that. His name tag said Marcus, and his voice had that soft edge people use when they're trying not to cry in front of strangers. He asked if I wanted to call my family, and I nodded, throat too dry to speak. Because, of course I did. He hesitated, then said he'd check. A few minutes later, he came back and placed a folded piece of paper on the tray next to my bed. I remember how casually he did it, like he was delivering mail. When he walked away, I opened it with shaking hands and read 5 words that made my stomach turn. Gone for 10 days, rest up. No names, no signatures, just that. 10 days. I was in the ICU, tubes down my throat. A machine had brought me back from death, and they had boarded a plane to Disneyland without telling me. I lay there, staring at the ceiling tiles, trying to decide if this was some kind of mistake, some scheduling mix-up. But there were no missed calls, no flowers, no texts asking how I was doing. I was 67 years old, and I had never felt so orphaned. It wasn't just the absence of them. It was the casualness of it. The way they'd written that note like it was a grocery list, as if my survival was an afterthought. An inconvenience. My mouth was so dry I couldn't even cry. I pressed the nurse call button, not because I needed help, but because I needed someone, anyone, to confirm I was still real. Marcus came back and sat with me in silence, his eyes darting to the machines like he was afraid they might go off again. I wanted to ask him why. Why would a daughter leave her mother like this? Why would a son-in-law sign off on it? But I didn't have the strength. And maybe, deep down, I already knew the answer. It wasn't an emergency for them. It wasn't a tragedy. It was an opening. A pause in my presence long enough for them to pretend I was already gone. That's when I realized something colder than the hospital air itself. My absence wasn't unexpected. It was convenient. The note was folded once, creased clean down the middle, like someone had taken a moment to make it look neat, polite. It sat on the plastic tray next to my water cup, the handwriting immediately familiar. I didn't even need to unfold it to know it was from my daughter. The paper was hospital issue, the kind nurses use for quick reminders. Blue lines, faint grey logo in the corner. I picked it up with fingers still stiff from the IV and stared at the words like they might rearrange themselves into something more human. Gone for 10 days, rest up, see you when we're back. That was it. No love, no explanation, not even her name. My hand trembled as I set it down, the movement sending a sharp pain through my shoulder, where the bruise from the defibrillator still bloomed like spilled ink. I looked around the room and tried to anchor myself in something, anything, that made sense. The wallpaper was peeling in the corner, exposing beige underneath where years of wear had scraped the pattern away. The light above me buzzed, flickering every few seconds like it couldn't quite commit to staying on. I focused on the sound of my own breathing, shallow and dry, like paper rustling in a draft. My body felt like it had been borrowed by someone else and only just returned. Every inch of me ached in places I didn't remember having. I lifted my wrist and saw the hospital band still snug around the skin, next to another bruise that I couldn't trace to a moment, just part of the collateral from being saved. What kind of person sees their mother through that and decides to leave a note? I tried to imagine the moment she wrote it. Did she glance back at me, unconscious and pale, and feel anything? Did she think to stay even an hour? Or was it always just about the timing? My mind circled through every version of her I had loved. The girl who used to braid my hair on Sunday mornings. The woman who cried when her daughter was born and asked me to hold her first. Where did that person go? I pictured her boarding the plane, smiling for selfies with her husband, laughing while pushing her daughter into the seat row. I imagined her holding her phone, seeing the missed call from the hospital, and choosing to ignore it. That's the part that stuck with me. Not the leaving. The silence. The room felt smaller with every thought. The air thickens. My chest hurt again. Not like before. Not medical. Just heavy. I looked back at the note and read it again, half hoping it would change. Offer some context. Maybe a joke scribbled in the margin to soften it. But it didn't. It was as sterile as the IV pole beside me. It wasn't the absence that hurt. It was the assumption that I would understand, that I would forgive, that I would wake up alone and just accept it as part of the deal of aging. 10 days. Theme parks. Sunshine. While I lay here, unsure if I'd ever walk again, I closed my eyes and thought of the last thing she said to me before the stroke. Something about scheduling, about groceries. Nothing that hinted at goodbye. Nothing that said, I love you. The nurse came in and asked if I needed anything. I asked for more water, but what I really wanted was to ask him something else. I wanted to ask him if he had a mother, if he'd ever leave her like that. But I didn't, because I already knew his answer would hurt more than the silence. The hospital van dropped me off in front of my house like a package no one wanted to sign for. I sat there for 10 minutes because the ceramic frog on the porch, the one that always held the spare key, was empty. I told the driver I'd be fine, waved him off like everything was normal, then waited in silence until someone finally opened the door from inside. It wasn't my daughter, it wasn't my son-in-law, not really. It was some version of him, standing there with a Starbucks cup, eyes wide like he'd seen a ghost. He said something about traffic, mumbled about stopping by tomorrow, but his words blurred as I stepped inside and realized this wasn't my home anymore. The couch was pushed against a different wall. My rug, the one Frank and I picked out from a roadside sale in 1987, was gone. The coffee table had been replaced with something cold and glassy. I looked for my photos, my books, my lamp shaped like a cat that used to sit by the window. All of it either moved or is missing. Then I saw them. My wedding photos, tucked into a cardboard box in the dining room, stacked like yard sale leftovers. Next to the box sat a real estate flyer, glossy and bold, charming southern home, ideal for young families. It had pictures of my kitchen, my backyard, my life, and I had never seen it before. My legs gave out. I slid down against the wall and sat there like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. I looked around and wondered how long they had been planning this. How many weekends had they spent measuring walls while I was in rehab? How many open houses had they scheduled while I slept, with monitors strapped to my chest? The walls were half painted in a shade I'd never approved. My curtains were gone. The scent of fresh paint tried to cover up something much colder. On the counter, a manila folder sat open, revealing legal papers. A power of attorney. My signature. Dated 2 years ago, back when I had knee surgery and trusted them to keep things in place, not dismantle them. They had used that paper like a wrecking ball. I stood shakily and walked through each room. My dresser was empty, clothes in donation bags. The guest bedroom, once full of my grandkids' puzzles and drawings, was bare except for a single folding chair. I touched the wall by the pantry, the place where Frank used to lean when he came home from work, and for a second I didn't know what year it was. I didn't know whose life this was. But I knew it wasn't mine anymore. And I wasn't welcome. Not really. Not ever again. The iPad was plugged into the wall near the pantry, right where Aaron always used to leave it. I don't know what made me reach for it. Habit, TT maybe? Or instinct? Or something colder, something that told me the truth was hiding in plain sight. It still had her account logged in. I tapped the Messages app and didn't even have to scroll. The last thread was with Kelsey. The top message read, "House goes on the market Monday. If she's not back, we'll start intake at Maple Creek." The word intake sat there like a diagnosis, sterile and final. I kept reading, fingers trembling just enough to blur the screen. Another text, dated 2 days before I woke up in the hospital. She was never good at boundaries. That was it. No anger, no grief, just analysis. Like I was a case study. They were finally closing after years of frustration. I read it again. She was never good at boundaries. The girl I raised. The one who sobbed in my arms at her prom because her date left early. The one I helped through grad school. 3 breakups and 2 miscarriages. I wasn't good at boundaries. That was how she saw me. I stood still in my kitchen, holding a device that suddenly weighed more than I could lift. There was more. Screenshots of listing paperwork, notes about furniture pickup, a to-do list that included cancelling my phone plan and notifying Social Security. It was all there, casual and efficient, like planning a yard sale. I looked around again, and this time the silence wasn't just sad. It was charged. It was electric. I had walked into a scene mid-exit. They weren't waiting to help me recover. They were counting on me to fade quietly. I wasn't a mother. I was an obstacle. I tapped the home button and saw a photo of my granddaughter on the lock screen. Her face, round and sweet, grinning with front teeth missing. And I wondered if she'd ever know what her mother had done, what they had planned. I sat down with the iPad still in my lap and pressed my fingers against my temple, not because I was crying, but because I needed to stop shaking. Not from sadness, from rage, from clarity, from the sudden, irreversible shift between who I thought they were and who they had just shown me they really were. That was the moment. Not in the hospital, not at the front door. Here. Sitting at my own kitchen table reading texts not meant for me. That was when the grief stopped. That was when I made the decision. If they thought I was going to sit still and let them bury me before I was dead, they forgot who taught them how to fight. James hadn't seen me in over 15 years, but he recognized my voice before I finished saying my name. He was one of my former students, now running his own firm out of a converted Victorian with ivy crawling up the porch. When I told him what happened, he didn't say much, just told me to come in right away and bring every piece of paper I had. I arrived with the manila folder tucked under my arm and fire in my chest. James sat me down, flipped through the documents, and pointed to one signature with a red pen. "This one," he said. "This is what they're using." It was dated during my hip surgery. I remembered it now, Kelsey handing me the paper while I was groggy and insisting it was just insurance paperwork. I'd signed without reading, trusting her like a fool. But James leaned back and smiled. The power of attorney gave them access to medical and financial affairs, yes, but it specifically excluded real estate transfers. They couldn't sell the house unless I gave explicit consent, which I never had. He looked at me and said, "If we move now, Helen, we can stop them cold." We didn't waste time. That same day, he filed to revoke their access, reinstated my legal authority, and drafted a notice of retraction for the listing agency. I signed every page with a steady hand, even as my legs trembled under the desk. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. By the time I got home, I already had a locksmith waiting. I changed every lock in the house, from the front door to the old side gate that no one used but me. I put Rick's tools in a box and left them on the porch with a note. "Pick these up before Friday or they're going to Goodwill." He didn't reply, just came by after dark and took them without saying a word. Next came the bank accounts. I closed every joint account, pulled my name from anything they had access to, and opened a new one at a different branch under a variation of my name. I withdrew most of it as money orders, stored them in a travel pouch, and placed them under the passenger seat of my car. I didn't feel victorious. I felt surgical, focused, like someone removing a tumor with their bare hands. There was no need for confrontation, no big speech, just clean, deliberate action. They had tried to erase me, so I erased their access instead. Piece by piece, I took back what was mine, and for the first time in weeks, I breathed without fear. I didn't leave with a fight. I left with a folding chair, a peanut butter sandwich, and a quiet sense that no one would stop me. The house was empty by then, just echoes and outlines where furniture used to sit, and the smell of fresh paint trying to cover up too much history. I packed only what mattered: my late husband's watch, a shoebox of photos from when the girls still smiled without thinking, a bundle of cash I had hidden behind the pantry shelf for emergencies I never thought would look like this. I wrapped each thing in a dish towel and laid them carefully in the trunk of my car. That night, I wrote 2 letters, one for each daughter. I didn't blame them. I didn't explain. I simply wrote, "You taught me who you really are. Thank you for the education." I left both envelopes on the kitchen counter next to the unplugged fridge and turned off every light except the porch lamp. By sunrise, I was on the road, driving north without a destination, just following the blue line of the highway, and a feeling in my gut that told me this time I didn't have to tell anyone where I was going. No GPS. No calls. No map except memory and instinct. Somewhere along the border between New York and Vermont, I stopped for gas and saw a billboard that read, "Quiet town, kind people, fresh starts." I circled the name. That was enough. I drove into that town, found a run-down trailer behind a bait shop and paid cash for the month. At the library, I introduced myself as Nora Whitman, retired, widowed, childless. The lies came easily, not because I wanted to forget, but because I needed space to breathe. For the first time in years, no one expected anything from me. I didn't feel sad. Not really. I felt still, like a storm had passed, and all that was left was the sound of my own breath. I wasn't running. I was removing myself, and this time, I wasn't asking anyone for permission. The trailer sat at the edge of town behind a faded bait shop with a crooked porch and a dusty vending machine that hadn't worked in years. It was nothing special. Just one bedroom, a tiny stove, and a view of a marsh that turned golden at dusk. But it was quiet, and for me, that was enough. I paid the landlord in cash and told him my name was Nora Whitman. I said I was retired, a former school librarian from Virginia, widowed, no kids. He didn't ask questions. In a town that small, people don't press. They assume everyone's running from something, and they respect you more for not explaining. I started spending afternoons at the library, sorting returns and shelving books. Volunteering helped me feel real again. I liked the quiet rhythm of it, the smell of paper, the way people would smile and nod, not knowing a single thing about who I used to be. That's where I met Rachel. She was a waitress at the diner across the street, young, but already worn around the eyes. She came in one day with her daughter, Lily, asking if we had any early readers with animals. I helped them find a stack and sat with Lily while she sounded out the word raccoon. Rachel looked at me like she didn't know whether to be grateful or embarrassed. I just smiled and told her I used to teach first grade. From then on, they came every week, sometimes just for books, sometimes just to talk. Lily started calling me Nana after the 3rd visit. I didn't correct her. It was slow, easy. No one expected much from me except kindness, and I had that to spare. I babysat Lily when Rachel picked up late shifts. I helped her with her homework. I taught her how to fold a letter into an envelope without tape. Every night, I wrote in a notebook under my pillow, keeping track of the lies. Nora. Widow. No children. Just in case I ever needed to remember who I was pretending to be, but with Lily curled up next to me, showing me a drawing of her family that now included me, it didn't feel like pretending. It felt like beginning again. It happened on Lily's 7th birthday, a small party at the VFW hall with mismatched balloons, store-bought cake, and folding chairs that creaked when you sat too hard. I was wearing a paper party hat and helping her unwrap gifts, smiling the way only someone who feels safe can. One of the other mums filmed it on her phone. Just a 30-second clip meant for Instagram, nothing special. Lily is opening presents, and I am laughing beside her, holding up a card for her to read. I didn't notice the camera. I didn't think twice. 3 days later, Rachel burst into the library with her phone in her hand and a look that stopped my breath. The video had gone viral. A mummy blog reposted it, and then someone recognized me. Not Nora. Helen. A side-by-side showed a still of me from the birthday party next to an old photo from the news coverage back in Charleston. Same face, different name. The caption was brutal. Grandma Ghost was spotted alive in Vermont. They figured it out. All of it. Where I lived, who I was with, and even the bait shop. My real name started trending again. The story reignited like a flare. The woman who vanished, the family scandal, the mother who walked away. Comments flooded in. Some cheered me on, calling me a legend. Others accused me of abandoning my real family. The town name was tagged. My trailer number showed up in a reply thread. I sat behind the returns desk and felt the walls of that quiet life closing in. Rachel dropped her bag and asked me what was going on. I couldn't lie this time. I looked her in the eye and said, "My name's not Nora, it's Helen. I didn't run from my family, I escaped them." She didn't flinch, she just nodded and asked, "So what do we do now?" That's when I knew the storm had found me again. I wasn't invisible anymore. And this time, it wasn't just my name they wanted back. It was the control they lost when I slipped away. I sat there, heart racing, realizing I had one last thing to protect. My peace. I saw her before she saw me, standing outside the library in jeans and a pale cardigan, holding a coffee cup like it might keep her grounded. Her posture was too straight, too rehearsed, like she'd practiced what to say, but still didn't believe it herself. I stayed inside, watching from behind the tall non-fiction shelves, my heart steady but my hands not. She didn't move, just stared at the door like it might open by itself. When I finally stepped out, she blinked, as if confirming I wasn't just a rumor. She said my name, the one I hadn't heard her say in months, and asked me not to walk away. I didn't speak at first. I wanted her to sit in that silence, the one she'd given me in the hospital. Then she said it again. "Mum, please." I looked her straight in the eye and said it calmly. "I already did the funeral. You just weren't there." Her face crumpled, not into a cry, but into something smaller. She wasn't prepared for that. She had come for redemption, closure, a reset. She tried to explain. Said they thought I'd be okay, said they were planning to visit, said the timing was off. I let her talk until the words lost shape. Then I said, "You left me to die, and when I didn't, you tried to sell what was left of me." Don't rewrite that. She wiped at her face and asked if I hated her. I told her no. That would mean I still had that kind of energy to give. "I don't hate you. I'm done with you. There's a difference." She asked if I'd come home. I told her I was already home, right here, in this town, in this life. One I built without her help and didn't need her to validate. Then I walked past her, slowly but without looking back. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't need to. She'd already said it the day she chose vacation over my life. Now, I was just returning the favor. We met at the cemetery just after sunrise. I was already sitting on the bench beside Frank's headstone, watching dew cling to the grass like it was holding on for one more hour. The place was quiet in a way that made the truth easier to say. She walked up slowly, clutching an envelope and wearing shoes that didn't belong on gravel. For a second, I saw the girl she used to be, the one who sat beside me during his chemo rounds and squeezed my hand too tightly. She didn't speak at first, just sat down on the far end of the bench, careful not to get too close. I opened the envelope without looking at her. It was the letter I wrote in the ICU, the one I thought she'd never see. She had scribbled notes in the margins. "I'm sorry. We thought you were stronger. I didn't know how to deal with watching you get weak." I folded it shut. "You think I needed strength. I just needed you to show up." She nodded, like she had already told herself that 100 times. I let the silence settle again, then said, "You and your sister are grown. You made a choice. You don't get to soften it now that people saw what it looked like." She asked if she could visit again. I said no. She asked if she could send letters. I told her she could send them to Rachel's P.O. box, but I wouldn't promise to read them. When she stood up to hug me, I didn't move. That part of me, I said, "You already buried." And this time, I chose the headstone. Mornings are my favourite now. I wake up to birds instead of machines, and the only beeping I hear is from the kettle. I sit on the porch with a chipped mug, wearing the same cardigan I've had for 20 years, and watch the mist rise off the marsh like it's telling secrets to the sun. Rachel drops Lily off some days before school. We pack her lunch together, and she always insists on adding an extra cookie for whoever's sitting alone. She kisses my cheek and calls me Nana, like it's the only name I've ever had. In town, people smile at me like I've always been here. No one asks questions about where I came from, and I don't offer stories unless they're about books or bad weather. I help at the library on Tuesdays and bake for the church raffle once a month. My life is small, but it is entirely mine. I kept one photo of my daughters. It's old, back when they still leaned into me without thinking. I keep it in a shoebox with Lily's drawings and the letter I wrote to myself the night before I left Charleston. I read it again this morning. At the top, in my own handwriting, it says, "You did it." I listed what I left behind. A name. A house. A silence that stretched too long between phone calls. And then I listed what I found. Peace. Purpose. A child's laughter that has nothing to do with blood and everything to do with kindness. I wrote a new letter today, just a short one. It says, "You're not lost. You're just Nora now. And that's enough." That letter went into the same box, tucked under a blanket that smells like lavender and coffee. This life may not have a family tree, but it has roots. It has warmth, and it has space for joy without permission. Sometimes I still hear cars slowing down in front of the trailer. I still check the locks at night, but I don't hold my breath anymore. If they ever find me again, they'll find someone who is not waiting to be understood. They'll find someone who already said goodbye. I don't watch the news. I don't check social media. The story they tell about me belongs to them. But here, in this quiet town with no history and no expectations, I'm not Helen Grace. I'm not the scandal or the survivor. I'm just Nora. And for the first time in my life, I decide who gets to call me anything else.